That would never happen. That is not standard. That is not normal behavior. The way that Father Judd's desk was arranged, that was spot on. You know, every parish priest's desk looks exactly like that. Hey guys, Father Patrick here, just jumping on to record a few thoughts for Godsplaining Reacts on the latest Knives Out mystery, Wake Up Dead Man. I want to say from the get-go, I really enjoyed the film. I thought it was great. It was very entertaining, and I appreciated the encouragement of my friend Katie McGrady to watch it. Because right away, and again, this is the view of someone who appreciated the film, right away, there's a very messy scene in the confessional. And I think the greatest problem of the film manifests itself right away in that confession scene. So I'm going to talk about that at length as we get later into this review. Okay, so Wake Up Dead Man, what is it about? It's about the boxer turned priest, Father Judd, who gets into a little dust-up in seminary and gets sent for some remedial service, do a kind of parish formation year, with the very driving Monsignor Jefferson, Monsignor Wicks, who's very clear about his formality, about his role. And what I think is so important is that this tension between Monsignor Jefferson Wicks and between Father Judd is not just a device of the plot, but I think it's something that's commonly enough seen in the Catholic priesthood and certainly has been experienced by a number of my priest friends, where you have a young, kind of idealistic priest who's been assigned to a very domineering, kind of set in his ways pastor. So there's that tension from the outset. The problem, though, is that Monsignor Wicks is clearly the foil. He's a very, very demanding pastor, and what I think is so interesting about his character is as the aggressive, alt-right, beyond the pale conservative, the thing that Monsignor Wicks is constantly doing is holding people for their sins. So this is where we see why Monsignor Wicks is such an anti-priest. Because what the gospel does ultimately is the gospel liberates people from their sins. But Monsignor Wicks, in both his tone, his rhetoric, and the way he treats his parishioners, again, as an anti-priest, instead of freeing people and liberating them from their sins, he holds them by their sins, so preaching against them, but also in important ways holds them to their sins. Now, Father Judd, of course, embodies many gospel virtues, particularly his evangelical drive. Father Judd wants to encourage people into the pews, and that's something that's typical of the zeal of a newly ordained priest. This is certainly the way that I was, and in a lot of ways it is. It's how I still am, thanks be to God. But that zeal, you know, is tempered because of the things he runs up against, the challenges he runs up against in his community, again, which is controlled in an exacting and very aggressive way by Monsignor Wicks. So there's a just as the pastor is domineering, I think what we could say about Father Judd as his foil is that maybe Father Judd is a bit too open and a bit too loose. And so that tension between the two of them plays out throughout the film. So that's my first thought, is that the relationship, it's about this relationship between Monsignor Wicks and Father Judd, which, again, you know, is a bit of a trope, it's a bit of a stereotype, but it's important, and I think it's helpful because it struck me as very real. Second, I think this film is a great film because of the way it portrays Father Judd's struggle with his vocation. All right, so we have this tension inherent between these two different kinds of priests, but also we have the young priest who's looking for his priesthood. So when a priest leaves seminary, it's a well-known and well-established reality that often he finds himself and really begins to uncover the deepest meaning of his priesthood in relationship to his people. And this is, frankly, just something that cannot be done in seminary. There's a complementary and extension of formation that occurs when a priest begins to get settled in parish ministry. He learns really how to love as a priest when people are entrusted to his care. And we see that happen in a dynamic way in Father Judd. Now, it can be frustrating when the young priest, Father Judd, when a newly ordained priest faces so many obstacles in ministry. So another very real scene, another scene that I really appreciated, is when Father Judd goes to the dive bar and has a lot to drink that night. Because you see that the tension, the stress, the sorrow inherent in the challenges, the obstacles he's facing in a priesthood just come out in such a real way. But the beauty of the film is that the true meaning, the authentic nature, the reality of the priesthood is recovered by Father Judd when he's on the phone with Louise, the secretary of the construction company, and she says simply, "Hey, Father, can I ask you something? Hey, Father, do you have a minute?" I mean, this phrase, these variations of it, a priest is used to. You get it right away. A priest is used to this tone that has an urgency, a desperation, a need from people in it. And it's in that moment, as he's trying to solve the mystery with the detective Benoit Blanc, who is excellently played by Daniel Craig, that Father Judd recovers his priesthood. Third thought about the film, I think that some of the language is a little stilted, and it's curious to me because in some ways it seems like actors or the writers, Rian Johnson, are more comfortable talking about sex and sexual realities than they are talking about religious things. So some of the religious language is not especially Catholic. Some of the phrases strike us as a bit off, even if the trappings and the setting of the film are dead on. So I did have that as a criticism. Some of the language just is not the way that Catholics speak. Fourth thought, I said we were going to say more about confession because there's this violent scene at the very beginning where the pastor is confessing to his associate. That would never happen. That is not standard. That is not normal behavior for a subordinate to hear the confession of his senior, of the priest who's leading his ministry, of a superior. That is not at all the typical practice. Only in the case of dire emergency would that ever be acceptable. So that is very strange from the outset. And then you have the tragedy of, as you learn, Monsignor Wicks using the confessional, just making things up as part of it. And so we get a kind of twisted sense, a kind of deep violation of the sacrament. Now, when I was describing this to another person, he said, well, Monsignor Wicks is the anti-priest. You shouldn't expect him to take the sacrament seriously or to respect the sacrament. And fine, that's fair enough. But I think there was also a kind of violence at the end where the confession of the person who commits the murder is received in front of everyone else. And it doesn't have to be that way. However, you do get a very public sense of the liberation the penitent receives when Father Judd ultimately hears the confession. And this is the point, again, that I like because it underscores the distinction I was making where Monsignor Wicks holds everyone, binds them, as it were, by their sins and chains them by their guilt. Ultimately, it's that last final confession that's freeing, that's liberating. Throughout the film, you get a number of very nice nods to things that are very Catholic, and of course you would expect that from the writing of the film, but some of the things I really liked were, for example, the way that Father Judd's desk was arranged. That was spot on. Every parish priest's desk looks exactly like that, including the picture of the unsolved robbery of the beautiful painting of the storm in the Sea of Galilee. That painting is stolen from the famous Boston Gallery and remains unsolved. So that's a nice nod to the kind of crime. Plus, you've got the disciples in the storm thrashing about looking for where to turn. And I think that represents Father Judd very well, who's in this contest for his vocation, looking for the Lord, asking, Christ, where are you? So having this painting right behind Father Judd's desk was a stroke of genius in the set design. I also really appreciated all the biblical nods. So the tomb of the former pastor, Father Wicks, and you learn throughout the film there's a very complicated, elaborate relationship between the former pastor and the current pastor, Monsignor Wicks. And at any rate, the tomb is a great symbol, not just because of the symbol of the resurrection and all of the things that one would expect, but because the whitewashed tomb is the accusation of hypocrisy that Christ makes against the Pharisees. You are like whitewashed tombs. And here we have this empty tomb, or this, not empty tomb, but this whitewashed tomb, which is just so out of place in this cemetery against this little country church. And you feel how thin the spiritual lives are of so many of the people in this place. So they are themselves whitewashed tombs. So the whitewashed tomb is a great gospel symbol there in the film. Overall, I really enjoyed it. I would recommend watching it. Again, there's a few scenes about the sacrament of confession that I think are problematic, and it's fine for us to name them as such. And I think, in fact, we're bound and should be very critical of that. But otherwise, it's a great film, and I would really encourage it as a watch. So if you're looking for something in the next few days, although it's not a very family-friendly film, if you're a parent, I would certainly caution recommending it. I think it's a great watch and a great film about the priesthood. Friends, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider making a donation to us, sponsoring our Godsplaining project. Like and subscribe to this episode and other episodes. Hit that little notifications bell on YouTube so that you don't miss a single thing that we put up. Please head on over to godsplaining.org where you can shop Godsplaining merch and sign up to receive our monthly email, which has all the latest on our upcoming events, what the Friars are up to, and much more. But most importantly, friends, I ask that you would pray for all of us here at the podcast and know that we're praying for you. God bless.